Yo, what is up YouTube? It's your boy Slow-Mo Eli back with another video, and today we're going to talk about what it takes to build a 1000 horsepower 370Z. You know, you see a lot of these cars on the road, but you don't really see many at the drag strip. There's a lot of good reasons why, but you know, let's go ahead and build a whole build on what it would take to make 1000 horsepower. So stick with us, you know, go grab some drinks, something to eat, and yeah, let's get into it. So let's get right into it. As you guys know, I've got a 370Z, and I've just always been interested in like VQs and the platform, so I kind of have like a good background, you know, a lot of knowledge of these cars since I've had them for over 3-4 years now. I think since I turned 18 I went and bought one. So yeah, I got a little bit of knowledge here, figured I'd share it with you guys, anybody interested in boosting their VQ, specifically the 3.7 VQ37 VHR, just because this is a solid platform. It's a V6, 3.7 liters. It is a little bit different than the motors that come in 350Zs. 350Z has a DE for I think like 03 and up to like 2006 or 7 or something like that. And the world's fastest 350Z is a DE, but for the most part, DEs are trash. Just stay away from it if you don't want to build, you know, if you don't want to make big power, you know, yeah, sure, you know, go and boost one. You know, no hate, you know, I still rock with my DE boys, you know, my boy Keyshawn. 07, 08, I believe. Yeah, those are the 2 years for the HR, I think. Those come at 350Z. It's 3.5 liter as well, same thing as the DE, but they changed a lot of stuff out on it. It's pretty much the same motor that's in here right now. Just doesn't have variable valve timing. So very good motors, those and these are the ones to build. So VQ35HR and a VQ37 VHR. If you're wanting to, you know, not go full send, I would say just go get you a 370Z motor or get a 370Z itself. Just because these VHRs can hold a little bit more power than the HRs, stock versus stock. So yeah, you know, I'm gonna do it in kind of like segments and categories. Let's say you're wanting to build a 600 horsepower 370Z. I guess you could say 600 to 700. 700 is not safe on the stock block, but that's what we're doing. You know, we're trying to just balls to the walls. You know, if it blows, it blows. For you guys that are, you know, still daily driving your cars a little bit, I would say 600 is the safer range for a stock block. So what you're going to need is a good turbo kit. I would say that's first things first. I'll drop one right here. Boom. I'm not a good editor, so I have no clue how this is going to turn out. But in my hand should be a boosted performance kit. They're reliable. I believe that they make all different kinds of kits. I think that they have a top mount, mid mount. They don't have a rear mount. I would say stay away from rear mount. As cool as they sound, I'm going to throw a clip of my boy Keyshawn's car here as well. I'm just going to plug them in this video because, yeah, that's my boy. They sound nasty, they're cool, you know, the turbo's in the back so you can see it, but it has a lot of boost lag. That is like one of the drawbacks. Yes, you know, it might stay cooler and stuff like that, but then you gotta run oil lines all the way back from the motor and just complications. So let's stick with top mount and mid mount. So I did top mount. I'll show you guys my top mount here, and I'll show you guys a mid mount. I don't know if you guys remember from my previous videos, my boy T50Z, he's built his 350Z for years. He just recently sold it for a BMW. But yeah, mid mount is going to be better always. Pretty much, it sits lower. You have a lot less complications because they use oil-less turbos, and they're more efficient. You know, for my setup, since I'm doing a top mount, you have a turbo sitting in the engine bay. You know, you've already got a lot of heat crammed in that engine bay, and now you're sticking a turbo there to just adding the heat. And then in addition to that, you know, top mount turbos, you have header on this side, header on this side. The way that it works is that you have crossover in the middle, and then there's going to be a pipe coming up in the crossover. That would be called your up pipe, and that's what runs to the hot side of the turbo to get everything spooling. That's just less efficient. If you just have header on each side running down to one pipe to a turbo there, a mid mount, that's way more efficient. You're not having another pipe that has to shoot back up in the engine bay. So if you're thinking about doing this and you're going big power, I would say mid mount is better, but you don't get the cool looks of top mount. You know, it's not right there in your face like mine is. That was kind of my selling point. And plus, it already came with the car, so I just stuck with it. So Boosted Performance is a good brand, I would say, and that's good for 600 horsepower area. If you want to do that, you know, go get one of their kits and you should be fine. You're gonna need a few things to go with that though. It's going to be more than just a turbo. You can't just slap a turbo on a Z and go have fun. I mean, you could, but you may end up in the median or off in a ditch somewhere. You're going to need some tires. There's a lot of different setups. You don't have to go get a full drag pack bead lock like I did. You know, that's a little insane for 600 horsepower at least. But if you're wanting to put 600 horsepower down to the ground, you know, you can go get you some RPF ones, some 18-inch RPF ones, and throw a ET Street R or ET Street SS Mickey Thompson's on there. I recommend 275 at least with a decent sidewall on there. 28-inch tire is a good idea. People do run 27-inch as well, stuff like that. But 28-inch is a good tire. We'll get into that a little bit as well. Like I said, I recommend Mickey Thompson. They're great tires. I'd say get a radial for sure if you're doing 600 horsepower. You can get you some RPF ones. You don't have to go get a full drag pack like this. You can throw, you know, some 275s on there, 285s, and try to get like a 28-inch tall tire, because that helps you out whenever you're roll racing. That's what these cars are mostly meant for. This is not really a good drag car. They don't have good suspension geometry from the factory. Even after you change everything out, it's kind of hard to get them to launch good. 28-inch tire, that's going to give you more mile per hour per gear. And that's kind of what you need for these cars for roll racing. You want more mile per hour per gear, stay in boost longer, and every time you shift, think about it, you know, you're losing boost. So if you're in a gear for longer, that's better. You don't want to be in it for too long, because then you're going to make so low end of power. You know, there's trade-offs, but 28-inch tire is recommended. I would say also next thing you're going to want to, you know, look into getting swapped out is your diff. So from the factory, 370Zs, they come with a decent gear ratio. It's a 3.69, I believe. That's not bad. You know, it's still fun, it's still treatable, but if you are trying to make that 600 horsepower and you want to stay in gear longer, I recommend swapping to a 350Z diff. They have a 3.53 gear ratio, so nothing too crazy. You're going from 369 to 353, but that just helps you, you know, if you're chasing 60 to 130s or you're out and you want to pull up next to something and you want to stay in gear longer, that's going to help you. You know, you're going to be able to hit your 130 miles an hour in fourth gear easily with no issue with a 28-inch tire and a 3.53 diff. Next thing, most important thing that I feel like gets overlooked, I've done it myself, I know plenty of people that have overlooked it, is fueling. Fueling is key. That's priority. That's your safety net, kinda. So if you're maxing out your injectors, you're maxing out your fuel pump, you know, not enough fuel, that's what blows the motor. You know, you starve that motor of fuel, it's just gonna, you know, I mean, the sound effect is kind of crazy, but, you know, you're gonna blow a motor when not having enough fuel, and that's for any car, not just these cars. Being a V6, you have to dump more fuel in there than you might think is necessary. You know, V8, they can get away with, you know, smaller injectors because they have more cylinders and stuff like that to make up for it. Us, we're trying to make a lot of horsepower. We're doubling the horsepower out of a 3.7 liter motor. You know, they come with 300 from the factory, and you're trying to make 600. So you're gonna want to do fueling. I always recommend, if you're going 600 horsepower, you're gonna want ID 1300s. People will tell you 1050s are fine, you know, 500s, top 500s, you know, but if you're gonna do 600 horsepower, overdo it. Overbuild your car always if you want reliability. That's the way I think about it. You know, coming from somebody that's had a lot of issues in the past, you don't want headaches with a car. You want as minimal issues as possible, and fueling will be an issue always. So ID 1300 injectors, that's my go-to. If you're trying to make 600 horsepower, the ID 1300s can make up to 700, so you have some room there for error. You're going to want to upgrade fuel pumps as well. Fuel pumps, for that, I would say you can get away with a single Hellcat pump. Like I said, overbuild it. Do twin pumps. There's so many kits out there that sell twin pumps. I'm going to recommend CJM. I'm going to put their kit here. CGM twin pumps, they're strongly recommended. They're known for all their fueling stuff for these cars. They make a hanger that holds the two fuel pumps, and it's pretty much plug and play the way that you wire it up. It's so simple. Stick with them and you shouldn't have any issues. Next thing after you did fuel pump, fuel return. You know, a lot of people overlook this. A fuel return it's a good investment. You know, they sell kits out there, CJM as well. There's also Z1 that sells kits. I stick with CJM, me personally. I've ordered a lot of stuff for Z1 and stuff like that, but CJM is just known brand. I stick with them and no issues. They sell a return kit, and that's just helping get that fuel pressure recycled. All that extra fuel that's getting dumped in there, whatever's not being used is getting recycled back into the fuel tank. So it's definitely a good investment, I would say. You're gonna want 1300s, you're gonna want a single Hellcat pump at minimum. Twins is preferred, you know, and they have their hanger as well, and then you're gonna want a fuel return. After you do all that and you've got your tires on there, you got your diff swapped out, you're ready for 600 horsepower. There are some little stuff. You're gonna want a clutch as well. Your stock clutch is not holding that up. There's a lot of good brands. ACT is a really good brand I recommend. I have one for sale. Yes, I'm plugging my sale again because, you know, trying to get that thing going. $700, I'll sell you my ACT clutch. Boom, there's a picture of it right here as well. And that's good for 700 horsepower. If you're building a 600 horsepower car, no issues, perfect. Now we're gonna step it up a bit. You know, if you're wanting to make more than 600, you can do 700 on stock block. So, you know, you're gonna use the same parts for that. Just know there now is a decent amount of risk that, you know, you might shift a gear and blow a motor. It happens. But 600 horsepower, you're golden. Let's do 800 to 1000 now. This is like where you're getting into the big boy parts of things. 800 horsepower, you're gonna need a built motor. It's just not happening stock block. There are, you know, a few unicorns out there that they've done 800 horsepower. I think Trash 370Z might have did it on his 350Z. And that's kind of a unicorn kind of thing. That is like, it could go at any time, you know. For 800 horsepower plus, we're gonna start again at the turbo kit. So for there, I'm planning to eventually make this 1000 horsepower car, but I'm gonna stick with my top mount. I love my top mount. I know it's never gonna be as good as a mid mount, but when you're really shooting 800, I start recommending twin turbo kits at that point. Twin turbo is gonna be the way. As you can see, there's guys out there, like I said, Trash, he also has, I think, probably one of the fastest, nastiest 370Zs out on the road right now. And his is running a twin turbo AAM kit. I'm gonna put that here with the stage 2 turbos. You're gonna wanna get those larger turbos. You can do twin turbos on a 600 horsepower setup, but I kinda recommend against it. If you're not looking for anything more, there's no point. Twin turbos is when you're going for big power, in my opinion. That's opinion based, but that's what makes sense to me. You know, if you're just trying to have fun with the car, single turbo is just fine. So I recommend AM twin turbo kit. If you're chasing big power, you're going 800 to 1000, and that's you're getting into big boy numbers. I think just for the kit, it's like 10K. So hopefully you find one used or something like that. There is another company out there that makes twin turbo kits. I think they're called Fast Intentions. Put their kit here. But I would say stick with AAM. They know what they're doing. I know a few buddies of mine that they're running AAM kits, and that's just the best thing on the market for big power, I would say. Let's get into the fueling. Same thing, bigger injectors. You're gonna want 1700s. 1700s at a bare minimum for big power. 800 horsepower to 1000. 1700s, I think the next step up is 2100, but that's like if you're really chasing just 1000, you don't want anything below that because drivability becomes an issue whenever you have so much fueling going into that motor. So 1700s, or if you're just chasing 1000 horsepower, you're not really looking for anything less, go with the 21s. But also speak with your tuner on that because every tuner is different. Some might say, 1700s are enough. Some will tell you, 2100s are what you're gonna need. Admin tuning or RS Enthalpy, those are, I would say, top 2 tuners. There's other tuners out there for this platform, but those 2 are going to be the ones that I recommend. They're well known in the community and they've been doing their thing for a long time. Me, admin tuning, he's gotten this car right, so I'm sticking with him for it. Next thing is you're already going to have that fuel return because if you need it for 600 horsepower, you're going to need it for 800 to 1000. That is non-negotiable at that point. You're going to need a fuel return, non-negotiable. You're going to also want twin Hellcat pumps like I just bought for my car because that is a goal eventually. We're building it for that, but yeah, so you're going to need some twin pumps with a hanger from CJM and all the same stuff. You're going to want 28-inch tires. Some people, at that point, I recommend, if you're doing 800 to 1000, I recommend V-locks or at least a proper drag pack. You don't need V-lock on there, but you can just go get you some welds or something like that. Something nice. 17s will still clear the big brakes in the back. If you do 15s like I did, you're not clearing. You're going to have to get a base model brake conversion. And that could be something you're not willing to compromise on. I know I just keep, you know, bringing him up because his car is so fast. I think he ran like a 4 something 60 to 130 is trash. Another car that is like, you know, very notable, like I would say, is something I'm very interested in. I may end up switching to it. Is Ray's setup. I'm not sure. I think it's Ray Z34. I'll put his Instagram here, and he's got twin mount, top mount turbos. So his setup is crazy, and that works for him. Like I said, twin turbos is going to be key. As you see, like that seems like that's a common thing for 800 to 1,000 horsepower. And I'm not sure. I think he's running 17s in the back. I think Trash is also running 17s in the back. I just, you know, I like the look of the 15s. It's more aggressive, and with the bead lock, it's tough. You know, it's just everybody's opinion. And then you're gonna want. I would no longer recommend ET Streets. You're gonna want some R's. They sell those. That's no longer like a street friendly. It's still DOT approved, but you know, you get in rain or anything like that, it has very minimal grooves. I'll put a picture of them here for you. But that's what you're gonna need to hook. Same thing with the diff, you're going to want your 3.53, so that full setup there. You do kind of get into a situation with the clutch. So with the clutch, now you're going to want to upgrade. You know, you no longer want that ACT that can hold 700 or something like that. You're going to want to step it up. There's a few brands out there, but this is what's been recommended to me. This is what I'm swapping into my car. It's the Spec twin disc clutch. So you're no longer having a single disc, you do twin disc. There's OS Gaikin as well, I think. Yep, yeah, OS Gaikin. I'll put a picture of both of those clutches here. They're a little bit more pricey, but it does the same thing, so I'm going to personally go with the twin spec if you're trying to do this on a budget. And those clutches are going to hold up. At that point, you kind of also have to worry about transmission. You know, all your driveline components at that point, you know, they're not going to hold up. This car is not meant for that. There's a company out there, Soho Motorsports. They make a drive shaft, or they sell a drive shaft. They don't make it. I'm not sure who makes it. And it's just upgraded. So now the next thing would be transmission. Nothing you can do about transmission. That's the part that kind of sucks about these cars. If you're making 800 to 1,000 horsepower, expect to go through manual transmissions. They're going to blow. You're going to have fun with them, you know, and eventually it's just going to go one day. Fifth gear is usually what does it in these cars. You know, you throw fifth gear and it's just, and it's happened to me before. I even did that NA. Fifth gear is just not a strong gear in these cars. So yeah, you're doing 800 to 1,000 horsepower. Expect to replace transmissions, you know, just depending on how you're getting on it. But if you're a person building a car for that, you're probably going to abuse it. So expect that. Next thing. Axles, if you're taking this car out on the track, you're trying to do digs with it, you're gonna blow axles. There's upgraded axles as well. Me personally, I'm cheap. I'm not doing axles. I think they're like 2,500 bucks for 1,000 horsepower rated axles. I'll put a picture of them here. Good investment if you are one of those track guys. I'm a roll racer, so you know I kind of have a little bit less stress on the car with that. And that's a fail point there. The diff is a cheap part. That's potentially gonna fail as well, but you can get away with that. You know, a lot of people have stock diffs and no issues. You know, they do sell aftermarket. There's like a Tomei or Trax or all these different brands. Wave Track is like really recommended. That's what I'm considering eventually doing in a car, but I'm gonna wait for this differential to blow up first before I do that. So I think we've covered fueling, tires, turbo kits, clutches, and the next thing is going to be that built motor. You're going to have a built motor. For 800 to 1,000 horsepower, you need a built motor. There's a lot of companies that do it. I would say there's not a lot of companies that do it right. So AAM, like I mentioned before, for the turbo kit, they also build motors. I personally would shy away from it. I've just kind of heard some stories from them. Not from them, but from people that have had their motors, and it just doesn't seem like the good route. What I plan on doing with this car is I'm going to put a CSS block in there. So I'm going to send you, or I'll post a picture here. I'm not going to send you anything. So there's a CSS block here. What they do is the coolant jackets that go around the cylinders, they actually CNC machine it's kind of like a block guard, if you guys are familiar with that fits into those water jackets, and they freeze them. I think they like put them in like nitrogen or something like that to get them frozen in. And then they press them into the car. Whenever it heats back up, it'll expand, and that locks in place. It gives you a little bit more cylinder support. Their name is literally CSS's Cylinder Support Systems or something like that. Yeah, and that's a definitely a good investment for these cars. All the big horsepower cars are running that. And then you're gonna want some pistons and rods. Pistons and rods are definitely a good investment. Believe Corillo rods and Wiseco pistons, that's just like the known setup. You're going to want to change compression around a little bit. Some people will stay with the stock compression, and that's completely fine, just depending on your power goals. You talk with your tuner on that as well. Stock compression is 11:1. I personally recommend going a little bit lower. You can actually get custom pistons from Wiseco. You can do like 10.5:1. That's what I'm going to do on this build. 10.5:1. There's people that can go even as low as 9. I don't recommend that, just because then you're losing that little bit of low end that these cars are just known to not have. So I say 10.5 or keep it stock. Next things next, you're going to want to get you some head studs. Head studs for that motor are a necessity, because these motors, the way that they blow, it's usually head lift. Head lift is what gets them. Even if you do pistons and rods, if you don't do head studs, you're going to lift the head on there. So the head studs that I'm going with are going to be the 625 plus aged ARP head studs. I'll put a picture of them here. And that is something non-negotiable. You're not getting away with, just piston rod combo and expecting 800 to 1,000 horsepower to last. These will lift the head. And then there is also a head gasket that is recommended. It is from, I don't remember at this time, but I'll put a picture here. I think it's a Cometic, or it might be an MLS. I think it's an MLS head gasket. That's the best one to get. I'll post a picture of it here for you guys. You're going to want that. So you're going to have piston, rod, CSS. You're going to do head studs. You're going to do an MLS gasket. You're going to want to also do some King rod bearings. When you send your motor off to CSS, they supply all that stuff already, so they have rod bearings that they supply. Your tuner may say, you need a little bit more bearing clearance, but CSS has their own specifications that they recommend, and they're kind of non-negotiable on it. So there's that. What is the next thing that you need with building these motors? Heads. So heads, you can kind of get away with stock heads. I plan on doing some springs and retainers from JWT. I'll put a picture of them here. And while you're in there, you might as well change out the valve stems or valve stem seals. I spoke with my tuner admin, and he recommended just going with OEM. There are upgraded ones that companies like Z1 or Concept Z sell. That's completely between you and your tuner. My tuner recommended OEM, so that's what I'm going to be buying. Ooh, excuse me. The next thing you want to do is, whenever you send your heads off to get, rebuilt, if you decide to do that, even if you don't decide to get them rebuilt, what I recommend is getting that surface, the head surface, resurfaced. You're going to want to have a flat and smooth surface to mount back onto the motor. You don't want to have any kind of issues where the head gasket blows out because it didn't seal properly, and that kind of eliminates that. Yeah, so I would say heads, very simple. You keep it stock, and just get it resurfaced. You're going to want to do piston, rod. The cranks on these are actually surprisingly able to hold up to 1,000 horsepower from the factory. Whenever you send your block off to CSS, they actually polish the crank for you, and that just helps out a little bit. Main studs are not a necessity for these cars. Some tuners will tell you you don't need main studs, that it can cause too much pressure on there and cause the block to warp, because these are aluminum blocks. I personally am not going with main studs because I was not recommended them. So if you follow that, you should be able to build a 1,000 horsepower 370Z. But there are issues and stuff like that that can arise. So we're gonna say 800 to 1,000. I think that's pretty much all you need, other than like gauges and stuff like that. You can get you a AFR gauge like I showed in my last video, boost gauge, oil pressure, oil temp. These are important things to keep an eye on while you're testing the car and having fun with it and stuff like that. You're gonna want to make sure you monitor all these things. The next thing is tuning. Like I said, there's admin or RSM to be those that are too strongly recommend, but there's tuning softwares that that come for these cars. There's UpRev and there's Ecutech. I previously cheaped out on my first Z and I got UpRev. UpRev is not a bad software, but that's the old stuff. It's just not the best for 800 to 1,000 horsepower. At that point, I would say non-negotiable. You need to get Ecutech. Ecutech, you can build in a lot of like safeties, and your tuner can do boost by gear, boost by RPM. You can even like put in sensor inputs into your tuning, like I plan on doing. Another one that is not necessary, but I plan on doing it just because it is strongly recommended, is a coolant pressure sensor. Admin Tuning actually sells them. I'm going to put one here for you. I'm going to do coolant pressure sensor because that's how you can kind of gauge whether or not you're going to lift a head, especially if you have that car on the dyno and there's no way of really telling, you know, when it's going to do what. If you can see, okay, you know, pressure is spiking here, let's ramp it back a little bit, let's take a little bit of timing out, you know, whatever. Your tuner would, you know, be able to do that. If they have that sensor, you know, they're able to easily monitor that. Another big thing, this happened with Griffin's car. She wants the Z. I'll put his Instagram here. He built a motor previously with Soho Motorsports. You know, they're typically known to be a good brand, but he just had bad luck with them and ended up blowing that built motor while tuning. Kind of sucks. But the reason they were saying that his motor blew was EMAP. That's going to be pressure from the turbo on the hot side not being able to be monitored. They do now have sensors. Admin Tuning makes a sensor for that, and I'm not quite exactly sure how it works, you know, because I'm not a tuner myself, but I plan on investing in that sensor. It's going to be able to read the EMAP, and your tuner will know, you know, is the boost or boost pressure 1-to-1. If it's not, obviously then they're able to see that and they can say, okay, you know, we're going to have to make some tuning adjustments. Before that wasn't a thing, so that's just another safety there. I'll put a picture of it here. Those are the two sensors that I'm strongly recommending, but are not necessary because there's cars that have done it without that. Yeah, I think that's it. You know, there's so much more that can really go into a 1000 horsepower build. If you want to take it crazy, you know, the stock intake manifolds on these cars are plastic from the factory, and they're known to start cracking around, like, I think 25 psi of boost and more. Some people get lucky and they don't. I'm recommending Olmedos, the guy that I bought my anti-roll bar from. He makes CNC billet aluminum intake manifolds, and they can hold up to 100 psi, I think he said, or 60 psi. At that point, you're making well above 1000 horsepower. You don't need more than that, but it just gives you extra, you know, reliability. In the future, I do plan to purchase one. I'll put a picture of it here. You'll see that price tag and see why it's not going on the car anytime soon. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. There's like some little like pieces here and there that I might have missed. If you have any questions about building a 600 horsepower Z or a 1000 horsepower Z, drop a comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, you know, just because I'm trying to get back into this content stuff while my car is down. I figure, you know, talk to you guys a little bit about the platform and my plans and, you know, what you can do with the car, just because I like seeing other people out there that are trying to push the platform. It's kind of a dying platform now with all the B58 stuff and S58s and AMGs and all these cars from the factory. You know, everybody would rather build a Hellcat, you know, throw a Whipple on there and go crazy with it. But I love seeing guys that are willing to push this platform and really trying to do something with it. So yeah, if you have any questions, you know, drop a comment down there. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Appreciate you guys for tuning in.